It is my pleasure now to introduce Gary Cohn. He is the president and COO of Goldman Sachs. He's been to the company since 1990. He became president in 2006.
I saw you in Fortune.
Gary, come on out.
Sorry, we were talking.
You were talking.
We were talking.
I know. It's great to see you.
How are you?
Thank you for coming. Gary Cohn, everybody. Well, where to start? Well, I'm going to ask you to emote, actually, probably, which is where to start, which is that, to his great credit, Lloyd Blankfein, your CEO and boss, was going to be here and try to arrange his schedule and his chemo schedule in particular around being here, and unfortunately couldn't be, and you were here in his place, but we're very pleased to have you here. But help us with this, because we have not heard.
Trust me, Lloyd would rather be here than where he is.
I'm sure of that. How is he? And what have the past couple of weeks been like for you?
So first of all, Lloyd's great. You know, Lloyd has the best spirit and the best attitude of anyone you would ever want to see going through a medical issue. And Lloyd is approaching it the way he approaches everything in life. It's just another chore. It's just another task. It's just something else I've got to deal with, and I'll get through it. And that's the way Lloyd has approached everything in life, and that's the way he's approaching this. He's in the office every day. He's engaged. The days he's not in the office, he's on the phone all day long, and, you know, relationships never been better. So, you know, things are great. My life is, you know, it's my life. I'm trying to make sure that everything that Lloyd would do in a normal schedule gets done, and I'm making sure that everything that I would do in a normal life gets done. And we're trying to do that seamlessly. It's just not me. There's other very senior people at Goldman Sachs that are getting opportunities to do things that they might not have gotten an opportunity. And the one thing I think everyone knows about Goldman Sachs is we have a very, very deep bench. Lloyd and I have been together for over 25 years. We've both been in the executive office for almost 10 years together. So we've got, you know, real breadth and real depth around us. So, you know, there's not a problem at Goldman Sachs. In fact, if anything, it's giving people opportunities to do things they might not have had the opportunity to do.
You know, the big theme of the day is playing for the long term, and one of the things that's actually so interesting, even in the past 6 years post-financial crisis, is really, or 7 years now, the transformation of Goldman and sort of where it was to where it is today. We talked about this a little bit with James Gorman. What is Goldman Sachs supposed to be today that it wasn't before?
Well, I'm not sure there is a transformation. Look, Goldman Sachs is a 146-year-old company. For 146 years, we've been coming in every day trying to figure out how to serve our clients, deliver to our clients what they need and what they want, and deliver it to them in the most professional, most expert way we possibly can. And we've been doing that. And that's exactly what we do, and we're going to do it for the next 146 years. Have we evolved our business model over this 146 years? Of course we've evolved our business model. Have we transformed the way we do things? Of course we've transformed the way we do things. Have we disintermediated ourselves? We have disintermediated ourselves. We'd rather disintermediate ourselves than have someone else do it. We've been very quick to adapt technology. We've been very quick to change the way we do things if it's in our client's best interest. That said, you know, if you look at the last 7 or 8 years, we're a completely different firm in structure than we were prior to that. You know, A, we went from a private partnership to a public company, right. But B, we went from a non-bank holding company to a bank holding company, and C, we've lived through a, you know, era of, you know, just enormous regulatory change.
When I say transformation, though, I'm thinking, for example, you recently agreed to acquire the online banking unit from GE that has $16 billion of deposits, or you've developed this thing called Lagoon, which is a technology play, effectively. Things that historically were so far, you would have never said those words, Goldman Sachs and technology play, or deposits.
So on the technology front, again, our clients demand technology. We've been investing in technology since the early 90s. Think of something called ARCA. Think of something called Ready. Think of this little company that we created called ICE. We created ICE to disintermediate ourselves in the commodity space. That little company that we created to disintermediate ourselves in the commodity space now owns the New York Stock Exchange. So if you look at technology and the way we think of technology is how does it help us grow our business, and more importantly, how does it help us provide a better product to our client? And we'll just continue to do that.
Let me ask you about culture. This is something I know you guys have focused a lot on. I've talked to David Solomon a lot about it. It's something you guys think about. And we were talking before with James about retaining young people. And by the way, even attracting young people. Little statistic, this is at Harvard, only 4% of Baker scholars, this is at Harvard, wanted to go into banking this year. I don't know what you make of that. But
I didn't go to Harvard.
You didn't go to Harvard.
That's what I make of that.
But is it a good thing?
Neither did most of our management committee.
Is it a good thing, though, that young people seem to be wanting to go more and more to Silicon Valley and elsewhere and away from Wall Street? Is this what the downsizing or downscaling of Wall Street has become, and what does it do to your business?
So we're having absolutely no problem attracting talent, as long as we provide the opportunity for talent to do what they want, and we provide an environment for them to work in where they feel like they're able to change the world, they're able to be involved with companies that matter, they're able to be relevant in an organization, we're going to have no problem attracting talent. I'm not worried what we're doing at Goldman Sachs. I'm worried about the rest of the economy. And I'm worried about job creation in the real economy and what's going on and how we're really growing the economy and how we're really going to create job creation.
Right. Let me just come back to the banking piece for 1 second, then we can go on to the real economy, and I want to get into that. When I think, though, about young people on Wall Street, one of the things that's changed is some people now say Wall Street is boring. And by the way, maybe you will probably disagree with that. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. But in the old days, if you were a young person on Wall Street who stayed up all night and put together the books, if you will, there was this sort of sense of purpose. At the end, everyone would go out drinking, or there would be a closing dinner. There was a sense of mission, if you will. Today, if you're a young person working at one of these firms who's staying up all night, the first thing is that the partner, this sort of apprenticeship model, is a little broken in that the partner is unlikely to actually be there. Now that they have cell phones, they're on the road, they're meeting with clients, and there is no closing dinner anymore. And so the sense of purpose, or the light at the end of the tunnel after you've stayed up all night, is effectively that the next day you're going to have to stay up all night again. What do you think of that? And I hear this over and over again from young people who are thinking about where they should be on Wall Street.
Andrew, so you stop working at 6 o'clock at night?
I do not stop
okay.
working.
I thought maybe
you know that.
I thought maybe you, because I know you've texted me like at midnight or 1 o'clock to try and figure out if something's going on.
Yes.
Okay, so I just wondered if
Are you outing
working.
yourself as a source?
What? No. I'm just wondering if in your world you get to stop working, that you don't work late. So in our line of business, people tend to work when the clients demand that they work. Yes, technology has changed our business. So the fact that we can electronically send a presentation around the world changes somewhat the apprenticeship culture to how you're interacting, but it also, the technology now allows us to outsource some of the more menial work to other parts of the world, so our analysts can get more involved with client relationships earlier and earlier in their career. So the whole model is evolving, and that's what life's about. You know, the Goldman Sachs of 20 and 30 years ago is not the Goldman Sachs of today, but no company is. You know, Jean just talked about her evolution at IBM and how they're evolving. We're evolving the same way. We're keeping up with the times, and that's just a matter of reality. And you know what? There still are closing dinners. There's plenty of closing dinners out there. If you want to be invited to one, we'll get you invited to a closing dinner.
Let's talk a little bit about growing the economy, as you said, and specifically startups. You spend a lot of time in the Valley these days.
I do.
With people like Travis Kalanick from Uber and others. Chris Sacca is going to be here this afternoon as a huge investor in Uber, along with Peter Thiel will be here too. I believe he might be an investor in Lyft. When you see the IPO market and specifically what's going on in the Valley right now, overheated, underheated, what is happening? So
look, you can't look at the Valley as a universe. there's a variety of different companies in a variety of different stages. The overarching point I would make about the Valley is, to the extent companies are providing goods or services that you and I can't live without and we're willing to pay for, they have created really viable business models, and we're never going back. You know, the fact that the millennial generation, the kids of today, think that you run your entire life off of a mobile device is not changing. We're not putting that back in the box. And so to the extent that we've got entrepreneurs that are continuously building better methodology for these people to live their life, these are going to be real viable companies. Are they all going to survive? No, they're not all going to survive. But it's very hard to pick winners and losers early, and therefore we're out there, we're getting involved with as many companies as we can, and we'll let the marketplace determine who's going to be the winners and losers.
But do you see us in a bubble? I mean, that's obviously, you go out there and that's the question everybody asks. That's the question everyone asks on this side of the country.
I'm not smart enough to know if there's a bubble. What I do know is they're providing products that I use and you use every day. Okay.
Let's talk about M&A. I think of you as one of the M&A powerhouses. There's not many left, by the way, that are out there. A lot of them have become either boutiques or Goldman. Where are we in the M&A cycle? And is the M&A cycle a barometer of health in the market right now, or a barometer or signal that we're actually quite weak? You look at some of the big transactions, InBev, Anheuser-Busch with SAB Miller. These are two effectively struggling companies that are coming together. What does that say?
So I think the state of the current M&A market is a state of the global economy. And by that, when you take what's going on in the boardroom today or in the executive office of big corporations today, corporations have gone through this 5 or 6 or 7 year process of doing everything they should do as a great management team. They started out by, as interest rates went lower, restructuring their debt, saving money through borrowing money cheaper and rolling out their maturities. Second, they went through this whole process of optimizing their business mix, getting rid of inefficient businesses, outsourcing what they needed to outsource, moving, manufacturing to the cheapest labor pools of the world. They've done all of those things. That's how corporations over the last 7 years have managed to create shareholder returns. They managed to create ROE and EPS, sometimes on flatline top revenue and sometimes even on declining revenue, because they've been able to do it on the expense line. That, in essence, has been done. So when you're done doing all of that, the next move that you have is, okay, I can take two businesses that are very similar to each other, and I can go through that process again. I can put two businesses together, and I can, again, get rid of duplicated expenses. So if I'm someone in the beverage business, per se, and I've got two distribution facilities, and I've got two back office facilities, and I've got multiple brewing facilities in similar locations, if I merge those businesses together and I close duplicate facilities, all of those savings fall to the bottom line and they fall to the shareholder, and they're in essence creating shareholder value.
Okay, the philosophical question. There was a piece on the front page of the Wall Street Journal just 2 weeks ago about consolidation, the amount of consolidation that's taken place over the years, and whether it's hurt competition. There was an editorial in the New York Times over the weekend talking about how perhaps all of these mergers have ultimately led to some degree of inequality in the country. What do you think of that?
I'm not sure I agree with them all.
Because?
I don't want to pick on any one editorial or another editorial, but I'm not quite sure I get the premise that how
the premise is that all of this consolidation has ultimately led, as you discussed, the idea that both there's going to be less people in the back office, so there's going to be people with less jobs. You have an issue where so much of the money, so much of this has been to the benefit of shareholders. So if you own assets, you've been a beneficiary.
Yeah.
If you haven't owned assets, you've been in trouble.
Everyone, look, who owns all the assets in America? Households. Households own all the assets in America. Ultimately, everything comes down to households. So the households have been beneficiaries.
Okay. Let me ask you a different question. Inversions. Where do you stand as somebody who is a banker who advises U.S. corporations on whether they should be pursuing different mergers and different acquisitions? and whether you think inversions are good, bad, and what needs to be done about them if you do think they're bad.
Look, I don't have an opinion on inversions. What I have an opinion on is that shareholders and boards are fiduciaries for shareholders. They are empowered to make sure that they're maximizing the return for shareholders. That's what a board is supposed to do. To the extent that a board can maximize returns for shareholders, they're supposed to do that.
Let me put it in a different context. So Pfizer may be in merger talks right now with Allergan. It would take Pfizer, one of the great iconic companies of this country, outside of the country. Should say also that the U.S. government taxpayers are one of the largest payers effectively to Pfizer because we buy the most drugs. So if you were a policymaker, not in your current role, what do you think from a policy perspective should or shouldn't happen to transactions like that?
Well,
and I'm not trying to lead the witness. I'm just curious.
Yeah, if I were a policymaker, I would make sure that we had a competitive environment here for corporations.
Would you take any other steps beyond that? Is it strictly just the tax policy
I'd
that
make
needs
sure
to
we
change?
had a really competitive environment for corporations. That would be my second step. After I get the competitive, I get the really competitive.
One of the other issues we've been talking about all morning is how much actually activists have played a role in all of this and played a role in M&A. Are you of the view that activism is a good thing, a bad thing? We did a little Jeopardy question earlier, and I'm curious where you'd come out.
It's neither good nor bad. You know, activists serve their role. Everyone serves their role in the marketplace. And to the extent that activists get involved and force an outcome that's in the best interest of shareholders, it's fine. To the extent that activists get involved and it doesn't work out for the activists, that's their risk. You know, to me, it's part of the open, fair, transparent market system that people are allowed to take their money and invest in a fashion they want to invest. The activist is allowed to do what he does because he's got limited partners and he's got investors, again, households, that want him to invest in that fashion.
Right. Do you think there's a moral question, though, about it? And the reason I ask is I'm looking at, for example, like Valiant, Herbalife. You have Bill Ackman on both sides of that. He's made a moral argument about Herbalife to some degree. Valiant, you know the guy who used to be the CFO of Valiant, former Goldman man.
I do know.
I should ask you what you think of Valiant in a second. But when you look at the role of an activist coming out publicly advocating for something that could do great things or bad things, is your view that it's a democratic approach and good things are going to happen, bad things are going to happen, and that's...
Look, it's a free market. And in some respects, the regulatory and legislative world we live in wants more and more of this. Look at all of the new proxy access rules. We're trying to give shareholders, individual owners, more and more rights to get involved and have more and more opinions about what goes on in the boardroom, who sits on boards. You can't argue on one hand that you should have more proxy access and that activists shouldn't be allowed to buy stakes and make demands. In some respects, it's the same thing. What's in the best interest of the shareholder? And ultimately, the board needs to do what's in the best interest of the shareholder.
Right. What do you think about the debate about long-term versus short-term? Do you think it's a real debate? Do you think it's a fake debate?
I think it's a real debate. You know, look, I wish we had more incentives for long-term investing. I think ultimately when you talk about a topic I raised a few minutes ago, growing the economy, and we really do need long-term investment. We need capital that's willing to be committed for a longer period of time. We need capital that's willing to be committed through the cycle. And rewarding investors that are willing to make those contributions is in everyone's best interest.
Real quick, and then we'll open it up. You just came back from China.
I did.
That seems to be the big overhang or big cloud, at least in the short to medium or long term, about our own economy. What do you think is really happening there?
So clearly, China is continuing or starting, it depends where you are, this transition from industrialization, building out the infrastructure, migrating 400 million Chinese from rural China to urban China. They've done that, and they're clearly trying to create a consumer-driven China. So, you know, when you're talking to the Chinese corporates and you're talking to the Chinese that are involved in the consumer side of the economy, you'll get a pretty bullish response. when you're talking and dealing with the Chinese involved in the industrialization side of the economy, the construction side, infrastructure side, you'll get a different view of China. The transition is going on. These transitions from building highways and railroad stations and airports, which happens relatively quickly in China, to creating consumer-driven demand is relatively slow and maybe somewhat painful, but in the realm of China, looking at things in 5, 10, 15, 20, and 100-year plans, they think it's happening relatively quickly. And so, short term, it feels like China is migrating through this transition. Long term, they feel like they're well on their way to creating a consumption-driven economy.
Let's open it up for some questions from the audience. We have a question right here in the front. Everybody's so quiet.
Thanks. I'm interested in your opinion on the future of Wall Street. So, as the buyers and sellers these days are with more and more tools and platforms over there, buyers and sellers are mutually more accessible to each other. And how do you perceive maybe the existence of middlemen will be less or no longer needed in the future? What's your opinion on this?
So, look, that theory has been played out in every market possible 10 or 15 times so far. What happens in reality is that buyers and sellers never really meet in the same quantity at the same price at the same time. So, take a simple interest rate market. What certain people want to hedge interest rates when they're low, and other people want to hedge interest rates when they're high. If you're an oil producer, you want to sell oil when it's high. If you're an oil consumer, you want to buy oil when it's low. The problem is those aren't the exact same times in the market. So if producers and consumers wanted to meet at the same time in the market and wanted to transact in the same exact quantity, you're right. Intermediation would be a lost art. Unfortunately, or fortunately for us, I guess, for the last multiple hundreds of years, the reality of it is that no one can really agree on price, can agree on quantity, can agree on terms. We as a financial intermediary are willing to intermediate both price, terms, quantity, and that's going to be our role. So, I'm very confident that financial intermediation is going to be around forever.
Should we try to sneak in one last question? Yes, please.
Hi. A friend of mine in his associate's training at Goldman was told that he was paid not to think, but just to execute. So what do you think that says about the culture at Goldman, and especially in light of trying to attract top talent?
Well, look, the gloves come off.
What was that?
Oh, I said, and the gloves come off.
So look, I think we have a great culture at Goldman Sachs. When you look at the firm and our history, and our ability to succeed in our business model, and our ability to capture market share, and our ability to grow our business, and our ability to adapt to ever-changing market environments, I think, and our ability to attract and retain great people, I'm very proud of the culture of Goldman Sachs. So I don't think we have a cultural problem. In fact, I know we don't have a cultural problem. I'm actually going through a promotion process right now at Goldman Sachs. I literally left there to come up here and talk about it. And the amount of time and effort we spend on the promotion process and going through candidate by candidate and what they do commercially, what they do socially, what they do from a diversity standpoint, what they do from a mentoring standpoint, all of these things count so much in the entire process that I have no real concerns about the culture of Goldman Sachs. Are there moments in time when someone feels pressed into a situation, we have to deliver a product to a client? Yeah, I'm not going to sit up here and say there's never a moment in time where we don't have to deliver a product to a client. And by the way, I don't think there's a leader of any business out there that says, look, there's certain times where you don't have to deliver a product and you just got to put your head down and you got to do what has to get done to deliver the product. I'm not pleased to hear that. But I look at the overarching culture, I look at the firm, I look at the 38,000 people of Goldman Sachs, I look at what we're doing for our clients, I look at the client feedback, I look at the surveys. More importantly, I look at the internal surveys. We do an enormous amount of surveying of our people And we look at that data and we have it analyzed by outside third parties on how our people are reacting to the environment of Goldman Sachs. And the most amazing stat that we get, and every statistical analysis tells us this, is how proud people are to work at Goldman Sachs. And would you have your best friend or would you have a friend work at Goldman Sachs? The numbers that we get in response to those questions are just off the charts statistically.